Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Jason's Take On podcast. I'm Jason Noble here in a very warm London right now, joined as always by my brilliant co-host and partner in crime, Mr. Whitehead. Say hello, Jason.
Hello, Jason.
Today we're going to record an episode, just the two of us, just having a nice casual chat, but just talk about it, kind of following on from the last episode about what's happening next with customer success. And really, is customer success in the middle of an identity crisis? Really, what are we here to do? Is it a mindset? Is it a team? Is it a way of working? Is it a revenue engine? Or what I think we all think it isn't, is it a catch-all for customer problems? But until we get clear on what it is and what it isn't, we're not just stuck, it's still at risk. So I think this really feeds nicely off the last conversation. And there's a lot to unpack. So we're going to talk through where the confusions come from, what we think's broken, and what bold customer success leaders and other commercial leaders need to do to really redefine their purpose and what they're doing. What they're doing, sorry. Let me kick this off for you, Jason. We'll kick off with a
Sure.
personal one for you. So when do you feel when did you first feel that customer success didn't quite know what it wanted to be? When, in the experience you've done, the customers you've worked with.
Right. This has been going on for so long now. It seems like for the longest time, it's been in this identity crisis, trying to figure out what is it, what's it supposed to be, and how do we know when we're there yet? But I think for me, it really came to light when I started working with a lot of different customer success teams as a consultant and coming in. And one of the first things I had to ask each of them is, what does customer success look like to you? What does it mean in your organization? What do you actually do? Because there were so many different flavors of it and so many different activities that there was no one coherent answer all the way across. And some customers said, oh, we do onboarding. Others say we do account management. Others say we do business reviews. We do all this stuff. But it wasn't really clear what their mission is or what they're trying to be or what they're trying to get to. So it's like, okay, if you don't necessarily know who you are or what you're trying to be or what success looks like for your organization or really a coherent vision for it, how the hell will you ever achieve it? So I think that's definitely a challenge for me. But what about you? When did it first start to kick in for you?
I think really similar. So probably for me, it's kind of the last 10, 15 years in
Mm.
a number of startup organizations, customer success leadership roles. And it was very clear that I had a different idea and interpretation of it. The sales team did, my teams did, the executive team did. And then I think one of the biggest telling moments from me was hearing from customers that they weren't sure about what it was. And I had one
Oh
customer say,
yeah.
"Oh, this is Jason, he's in sales." And sure, you could argue that we're all in sales, but I think hearing externally that people weren't sure what it is, or to your point, had different interpretations, really flagged that there is an identity crisis. And I think it's still, I said for me it was 10 plus years ago. It's still
Yep.
there. I don't think we've solved this. But let me ask you, and if we look at the basics, then what's driving this confusion? Is it just that people have different interpretations, or is there more to it?
I think there's so many different elements. What are all the elements that go into an identity crisis? But one, there's not a clear, compelling vision across the industry or standard about what it needs to be. We've got a lot of voices saying a lot of different things. We've got our friend Dave Jackson saying product-led growth, and we've got other folks saying no, it's about business outcomes, and we've got this, we've got that. Others, it's about training, getting onboarding right, and getting first time to value, and it's a little bit of all those things. But when I think it really comes down to it as well too is the folks that are leading it don't have a clear definition of what it needs to be in their organization, and it's not consistently shared. So I think that's one of the big things. And here again, is it expansion and growth? What does that look like? And do you need to be the team that does all those activities, or do you need to be the team that creates the groundwork for it? So it's hard to find one thing because I think that's too simplistic. But there's so many different things. But I do think the way out is for someone to put a stake in the ground and say, this is what we're going to be, and this is what we're going to unite around and rally the flag. But what about for you? What do you see as sort of the root causes? What have you
I,
encountered?
I think it's very similar. And just a correction, Dave talks about customer-led growth,
Oh, customer.
not product. But yeah, I think it is that misunderstanding of the definition is fundamental, because then you get misaligned goals, misaligned metrics, quite often internal metrics. You get, depending on where your customer success leadership sits, you might get If you're reporting to sales, you get aligned more on the purely the commercial side, and sales might have a view that it is just account management,
Hmm.
and maybe that's the answer as we talked about last week. But that confusion is absolutely huge, and I think still the challenge is though where how do you define it and who defines it and how do you make it clear to your customers? And I think going back to what we said last week, is the
Right.
name itself confusing? Do we just need to look at what it actually is and make something that's very clear for customers? Because I think that
Hmm.
external confusion is really critical. If customers don't know why you're doing it and they know who I am, they've
Yep.
got my phone number. If I'm a customer, I'm going to phone up someone that I know will do something about this. And even if
Right.
customer success isn't support, they'll point you in the right direction. It might not be the right thing to do, it might not be the right process, but that's the mentality of what we do. We're here to focus on the
Yep.
customer. And so that
You know,
confusing customers is the biggest challenge.
I really like that. And I think, one of the things we've talked about before as well, too, is customers that have 70, 80, 100 apps in their organization, they're getting 70, 80, 100 different flavors of customer success. So they're constantly exposed to different varieties of it. So of course there's going to be confusion for them as well, too. And also when you look at the customer side, and as you know, I work with a lot of the buyers of software as well, too, to drive change and adoption in their organization, help them get the most. There's still a wide variety of confusion about what is the role of IT in driving success in their organization? What's the role of the business in driving success in their organization? So it's not just on the customer side. And I think until people can really get some clarity around that, it's going to hurt quite a bit. But let me throw one over to you, Jason. So, given all of this and this confusion and where we are, who owns the customer today and really who should? And what does that need to look like?
I think it's a really big question. I think there's perhaps too much put into this. That the reality is that no one does. And I think
Hmm.
saying different teams do adds to that confusion. And what you end up with in most organization is a patchwork of who owns different parts of the relationship and what you do. You may have implementation, professional services, or customer success owning onboarding. It may be an
Yep.
management team owning the renewal, product owning feedback. But the key thing is the customers absolutely don't care. They really, it doesn't matter to them. They're not bothered about
Right.
us. What they want is one one team, and by a team I mean the whole business that's focused on their growth and success. And what I've said many times before is, for me, our role as CS leaders is as a facilitator or even an orchestrator. We're here
Yep.
to make sure that the outcomes the customers are looking for happen, no matter who touches them. And quite often, what we do is help facilitate those conversations. And I think that's really, really important. So I don't think there is an ownership of the customer. I think what you need to make sure is that everyone's focused on what are we delivering for customers, what are the outcomes they want, what are the values they want, how do we do
Hmm.
this, that you're all focused around that single goal. But then you also make it very clear for a customer, if you need to talk about X, Y, or Z, these are the different teams you contact, and don't make it confusing. So the simpler it can be for customers, and try and do what we can to break down those silos, because that siloed thinking is a big factor to all of this, I think.
Yeah, I agree with that so much. And I think you're onto something too with the silos, and when sales doesn't can't accurately describe what customer success does or what tech support does, if there's that internal confusion, you've really got a problem. And I've advocated for ages that I think, CCO should be actually a chief collaboration officer. How do we make sure everyone is breaking down barriers? And when I look at a lot of CSMs today and a lot of the folks in the CS team, they may occasionally have a handover call with sales, or they may bring sales into the odd conversation with a customer, but they're really not trying to break down silos. They're really not trying to make sure everyone's focused on this stuff. They may send a little bit of feedback to the product team, or ask for help with a particular product issue, but they're not helping to create ahas for the product team about, oh, this is a broken process that's impacting our customers, or this is another issue. So there really needs to be a lot more of that, I think, as well, too, to get to, the holy grail is the customers are achieving and perceiving value, so they buy more. And I think people really sort of forget that that is sort of where I think we're trying to get to.
Really interesting thing. I mean, maybe was the whole reason for let's say that siloed thinking is a big problem, and it's something that has happened over the last few years. Well, maybe it's been here a lot longer, but as customer success is another reason we've kind of created this function, is recognizing that there is a problem, that it needs to change,
Hmm.
and we need a function, team, way of working, way of thinking to make that change. So is that another reason why we've created a customer
Yeah.
success function that can kind of step up above all of this and say, I'm not worried about the silos, I'm here to do this? And I think the more I think about it, I think the answer is yes. And I think we've not really realized that absolutely we're a key function. And one of the reasons we're here is to help instigate this change.
Yep, I think so. And when I look back sort of 15 years ago and plus around there, when CS was really starting to figure out that it should even exist and people were starting to learn the term CS, a lot of the early advocates and players were with a lot of the customer success providers, the CSPs and platforms. And many of those folks had a strong background in marketing and strong background in how do we just message this differently to customers. If we get the message to them after they're a customer, they'll do more and they'll know what actions to take and they'll see what we need to go. So I think they brought a lot of the initial processes and philosophies from a very marketing lens. And I think we're realizing that communication is a big part of what needs to happen with customers, but it's really not a marketing approach that's going to get you there. There's so much more. And I wonder if we were reinventing the CS world today based on what we know now that we didn't know then, where would we still take that approach? Where would we scrap a lot of stuff and say that's absolutely the wrong thing? Because, in my mind, it always comes back to if customers are not adopting, not achieving value, and not getting measurable outcomes that they can see, they're not going to renew. And it doesn't matter how good your product is if they're not able to make it work for them. It's not if it's not good in their organization, if they're not good at using it, it's not a good fit. It's not a good product. They're not going to renew. And I think we've sort of missed that we're not solving the right problem a lot of times. And I think that's where we really need to take a different tack.
I think you've hit a key thing there as well. Is that there's a lot we've learned, and we're now in a position where, look, what's the right thing to do? What hasn't worked? What does
Yeah.
work? Let's change this now. Then let's talk money.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
should CS be a revenue function? I think you know my thoughts on it, but talk us through
Hmm.
what you think and why. Should it be responsible for revenue? What accountability should it have?
Um, I think this is a yes and for me. And yes, and it's not as clear as my thinking has evolved some over the years. I think CS absolutely has to be perceived as a revenue generator in the sense that without CS, the revenue won't be there. But it doesn't necessarily mean that everyone in CS has to have a renewal target, has to have a number by their head. It may very well mean that you still have account managers who are doing those revenue discussions and doing the contracts and negotiations and those sort of things. You may have another specialist in CS who are more focused on adoption, who are more focused on creating that success that is necessary for revenue to come in the door. And I also would like to see, and I think we're not there yet, but as we're talking more and more with companies and they're moving towards a consumption model, whether it's fully, no seat license, but based on how much you use with that. And sometimes you see this a lot with AI and AI credits and usage increases your fees. Is that whole, the better the adoption, the better the outcomes, the more they're going to spend with you kind of thing. So I think people are realizing that, but I would love to see CS being so good at creating value for customers and proving the value that they've created that they actually are an initial sales accelerator. Sell on the value of your CS. Sell on we are so much less of a riskier proposition than our competitors because we have the track record to prove that we deliver value to our customers. That brings sales in faster. That makes it easier for people to get started. That's not a sales function. That is because of the work that a CS team could and should do. We're not there yet, and I wish we were there, and I think we can get there. But I think it's more than that. But also, like we've talked about, I would love to see everyone in the organizations have a large portion of their compensation based on revenue coming in the door and customer adoption and retention numbers, and customer outcomes. Because I think then, even if you're not the one having that contract negotiation, which people think, oh, we're a revenue generating function, that you're still tied to a revenue goal. So I think for me, it's a little bit more complex than it is for other folks. But what about you? I think I know what you're going to say, but I'd love to get your
I
take on it.
think I completely echo what you've said, and I think it's a yes, and there's an and a
Hmm.
but. We're not sales. We're not there doing new biz. We're there, and I think you've got to differentiate the approach from standard sales, what we're trying to do is ensure
Right.
our customers get ongoing and growing outcomes and value from us. And that value, I think there's a whole different discussion about what value means.
Yep.
Value can and does have a monetary value, but can be interpreted differently. But it's understanding what that is. And you we're not a sales function, but revenue. We have responsibility for revenue outcomes. And I think that's the fundamental thing. And I think if
Hmm.
we can't drive renewals, if we're not driving expansions or long-term value or growth, I'd question what are we doing? So I think what
Yeah.
we've got to do is and I know there's been some, maybe probably 3-4 years ago, a lot of challenges that CS, you get pushback from people saying, we're not sales, we don't know how to do it, we don't know how to sell.
Yeah.
That's shifted. And I think I've seen good examples where I've worked before where CS wasn't commercial and we had to make it
Hmm.
commercial. So what you do is you bring in, get your sales team to help with training. How do you do commercial
Yeah.
negotiations? If it's missing skills and experience, train them up to do it. But I think to your
Hmm.
point, understanding what the revenue outcomes are that CS is driving and responsible for is fundamental. And it does. There's a lot of talk previously about CS as a revenue engine, a growth engine for the business.
Yeah.
It is. We want our
Hmm.
customers to get more value, to drive growth for them, for us, and help us with our revenue. And I think that all ties together. And I think it's really important. So I,
Hmm.
I, I think absolutely it's a yes and a yes, but I definitely need
Yep.
to revenue.
Yeah. And I like what you're saying there, because I think the CS, whatever that team is and whatever boundaries you put around it, to your point, needs to be seen as creating the conditions for ongoing revenue retention and generation, as opposed to being perceived as a cost center. And I think some of the things we're seeing now with some customers, some SaaS companies, like laying off entire CS departments or dramatically cutting down, they're not viewed as essential to revenue retention. If they were, they'd be the last people impacted. They may say we've got some poor performers and they need to go, but they would backfill them with other performers, kind of thing. But let me ask you, given all this and where we are, do you think it's time that customer success needs a rebrand and a new identity? And what would that look like for you?
I think it does. And I think we
Hmm.
talked about this last week on the podcast before. We've talked about it before. And I think going back, the name, while you could argue it's obvious what it's for, it causes
Hmm.
confusion, as we've talked about. And I think it's also been diluted as to what it is. The big question that I remember a conversation with someone probably 5 years ago. Well, what should it be called? And I still don't have the answer to that. Is it the customer growth team? But what does that mean? Are we customer growth
Hmm.
consultants? Are we customer outcome consultants? Or
Yep.
are we? I think for me, the answer is we're really part of a broader function. That customer success, as we've seen it, has served its purpose. And what we need to do is move now to an evolved, more customer centric account management. So our customer
Hmm.
managers, customer success managers, our customer success functions rebrand if we don't have an account management function, or merge into our existing account management functions, but become account management 2.0 or even 3.0, because it's a
Hmm.
big shift. And I think that change would really help force organizations and us as leaders to really look at what CS is doing. And I think it's really,
Hmm.
what do you think?
Yeah.
Should change it?
I, oh, yeah, it's a mess. Absolutely. And I like what you're saying too, because I've also, when I take it one step further, I'm not even sure that SaaS as we know it should stick with software as a service. I think maybe it should become software and a service. We're talking about organizations are trying to buy outcomes. They're not trying to buy features and functions. And yet we're still selling software that delivers features and functions. And we're trying to occasionally do a little service, little customer success, but not too much, because we don't want to make our revenue through that. We don't want to be a professional services. But if what customers need to actually get their outcomes are a little bit of service and a little bit of software, you need to find some way, either through building that capability yourself or through partnering with service providers that have the right skill, whether it's technical subject matter expertise, like we've seen in organizations like with security and cyber and all that good stuff, whatever it needs to be, or change and adoption, whatever it needs to look like. You need to make sure you can bring the full suite of what a customer needs if you're going to sell an outcome. So I think if we stop thinking of ourselves just as a software company, but there again, if the software company is the basis by which they bring in the other services that a customer needs to actually achieve their outcomes, then maybe it is software and a service, or you know, an outcomes engine or an outcomes company, whatever the hell you need to be. And from there, I think you could drive down more. Okay, this is what customer success fits and looks like in that context. But I think the name is a misnomer. I think it's like you say, it's become a dumping ground. And while it may have sounded nice and exciting initially, I don't think it's living up to the hype. I believed in the last podcast we've done. I said, we need on the customer side, you need an outcome and adoption and outcomes team, an A&O team. And you also need the same thing on the vendor side, adoption outcomes focused on that. And then maybe a separate account manager. Does customer success fit under that overarching umbrella? Maybe, but I don't think it's quite there yet. And I'd like some clarity on what is it we're trying to do to really put a stake in the ground.
We talked about this earlier on, but what do you
Mhm.
think the fundamental differences are between how organizations see customer success it is today internally versus how customers see it? So what do you think the key differences there are?
That's a great question. I'm leaning towards internally, it's sort of seen as, I think the reality is it's seen as a dumping ground. Anything customer that we don't want to touch, we throw it to them. If technical support doesn't quite know what to do, oh, well, let's get in touch with customer success and have them figure it out. If sales doesn't quite know what to do or just doesn't want to deal with something, oh, let's throw it to them and let them figure it out, which is kind of tough when they really don't have the remit, like we talked about, to do silent buster and those sort of things. And I think with externally, I think they're still kind of viewed as an onboarding and a training team. You know, some of them may say, oh, they also do my renewals kind of thing. But I don't think they're actually perceived in many customer organizations. Not all. I don't want to be a sweeping generalization, but I don't think they're really seen as adding as much value to the customer as you know we would like to believe they are. But those are just some of my thoughts. But what would you say? What do you see as sort of the big
I,
things there?
I agree with that completely. I think I've seen too often, and Rav talked about this. CS can become a dumping ground for everything, and and I think part of it is our own doing. We're all in this world where we want to do the right thing by customers. So if a customer reaches out to you, you'll help. But
Mhm.
what that also reinforces is that you become the team when customers go to when there's a problem, or even internally when there's a problem, and
Yep.
that's not strategic. I think quite often what it can kind of do for customers and externally is it can reinforce or drive a thinking that we're support, but just with a friendlier way of thinking, a friendlier title. And I think
Yep.
so you've got that, and I think that absolutely has to change. And I think that is part of, as we talked about earlier, it's part of the problem. There is this massive still misunderstanding internally and
Mhm.
externally as to what we do.
Yep. And yet we've still seen that some CS departments and teams are really good at driving revenue and have the numbers to back it up. And they can do the cohort analysis and before and after and all that good stuff. And others are getting laid off because they're not being perceived as valuable or wasting time and those sort of things. So let me ask you, what have you seen that like the bold CS teams are doing that sets them apart from those that are sort of stuck in the crisis or just not getting it done? What's the differentiator that you've seen?
I think there's two things. And one for me, and we've talked
Mhm.
about these. One is that they're not task based, that they've got to be
Mhm.
focused on outcomes and understanding what outcomes do those customers want.
Yep.
Outcomes, value, but what are my customers trying to achieve? Trying to achieve as a business, but then how do we help them achieve that? We play a small part in that. And I think you've got
Mhm.
to understand those two there. So having CS professionals, CS managers, CS leaders, ops people that understand outcomes and what outcomes mean for customers is absolutely fundamental. I think
Mhm.
we've talked about this, you've got to have a commercial mindset. We're not here
Yep.
as a cost, we're here to deliver commercial value for our customers. And that's absolutely fundamental. So that leading with outcomes, not tasks, and being commercial in the way we think.
Yep.
What try and avoid saying we're here to help you get better use of the product. And even I say we're here to help you adopt the product. We're not. We're here to help you get more value from the product quicker. We're here to help you grow quicker. That's fundamental. And it might just seem like word changes, but I think it's really, really critical. And I think we've also got to the closer you said it earlier on, but that closer
Mhm.
alignment with sales, be part of our strategic sale. We can sell the value of what we're doing, and also
Right.
be aligned with sales, be aligned with product, be aligned with engineering, really be there understanding what we're trying to do. And that really helps show that we're there. We want to redefine what we do and work
Mhm.
across the business. I think that's really critical. What are your thoughts?
I agree with a lot of that. I think one of the things you said earlier that stuck out with me is, again, being more of a strategic vision and seen as a strategic part of the business, that without this, we wouldn't get there. I mean, I remember even, was it 5, 6, 7 years ago, we were still having conversations, does CS deserve a seat at the executive table? And I think people have kind of realized that, oh, yes, CS needs to be part of the C-suite. It needs to be there, and it needs to be engaging with the board and looking at those strategic issues. So I think that is definitely a piece of it. As you know, I'm still a big proponent of the adoption piece. I know you sort of said I'm not know about that, but for me, that comes down to what's the root cause problem that needs to be solved, which is customers are not, not adopting, therefore not getting the outcome. So I wouldn't separate adoption and outcomes. I think they need to be, completely linked. But I still think a lot of customers are really bad about getting people to use software effectively in their organization and need a lot of help there. So I think that for me, that has to be a key piece of it. If we can't get our customers to adopt it, they will never get the outcomes. It's not the end game, but it's on the critical path. So I think those are some big ones right there. I think they're having the conversations around what does value creation look like and how do we help our customers know when they've achieved it. And I think the really bold ones they're like, okay, we don't need to be doing a quarterly business review because it's the quarter or it's a business review. And I think people are starting to move away from that. Like, oh, let's talk about a business outcome review or a business value discussion or planning. So I think we're seeing some people that are going, okay, that's just nonsense. Why are we doing that? And what happens if we don't? And I think the bold teams are really rethinking a lot of that. So that's really exciting to see, is like people getting beyond just the habits. And the distinction I like to make is, is that best practice or common practice? And I think there's a lot of common practice out there that we've been told for years, and in trainings, even trainings I've delivered, we've talked about this is what it looks like, and sort of moving on from that. And I think people need to understand sort of the fundamentals so they can move beyond and say it's not working, it's not looking, and taking that critical lens. So I think that's really, really key. But let me ask you, because I think we're sort of winding down here. What is the risk if we don't solve this identity crisis now? What happens if we just sort of keep going the way we are?
Well, it's interesting because initially I was thinking one of the big risks is that customer success could disappear as a standalone function. But then I'm going against what
Mhm.
I said earlier. I think maybe that's a natural evolution.
Yeah.
But what we need to be very clear on is that it evolves the right way. It doesn't evolve into support. It doesn't evolve into an operational function. It has to evolve into a new or different commercial function. And I think the key is if CS leaders and CS teams today can't define the value for the business, that the real risk is someone else is going to do it for us. To your
Hmm.
point, that's why we've seen changes in teams, redundancies, restructuring, and if someone
Yeah.
else does it for us, we're not involved in that. It might not be as strategic as and long term as we want it to be. And I think
Hmm.
this is the moment for us, CS leaders, CS
Right.
professionals, is really to be bold and proactive, or we risk becoming irrelevant. And I think that's critical. And I think the big thing is that the message behind the podcast and this episode and the last one is that we don't, it's not about waiting for someone else to define what customer success should be doing.
Hmm.
It's really, this is the time for bold customer success leaders to help reframe the role, realign the metrics, rebuild the model around the true customer and business impact. The identity for customer success is about what we want to create and how we create it. And I think, well, as we do normally, let's
Hmm.
finish on a bold challenge question. I want to throw one to the listeners here to ask your exec team this. What do you, as the exec team, believe customer success is here to do in this business? And then write your bold one liner for the team and lead like that's your mission. And I think that understanding is absolutely critical. So, bold challenge, ask your exec team, what is your customer success team to do? You may be surprised. If you are, how do you change that? If you are, how do you work with them to achieve that? If it's different and it might be wrong, how do you help
Hmm.
re-educate? That's really key.
I love that. I think that's really key. It's a great question. What do you believe customer success is here to do in the business? And I would go one step further. I would ask the exec team and use that to reorientate yourself. And then I would ask every other person in the business today to see what they think and what their understanding is to help you navigate the waters of becoming what the executives want.
Absolutely.
Really good stuff, Jason. Thank you so much for joining me today and for doing this with me. I've enjoyed what's been over 100 episodes now that we've done together.
It's good fun, and I think these are big conversations. You know, we're going to take a pause now over the summer, but we'll be back kind of end of July, August time, but for more of these conversations. And do please let us know if there's a leader you'd like us to interview, to have a conversation with, and be sure to subscribe and let us know what you think. Thanks,
Awesome.
everyone.
Have a great day, everyone. Thank you. Bye.